This podcast episode of RealAg Radio is brought to you by Authority Strike Herbicide from FMC. With just one application, Authority Strike gives you a strong start with a powerful one-pass burn-off and keeps working later with extended weed control. Stop by your local retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/ca to learn more.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday midweek edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, a great shout-out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast as well. I'm broadcasting here today from Kansas City, Missouri. I'm at the Top Producer Summit, having a great time. This is a fantastic meeting. Really enjoyed my time here. I have run into so many fans of RealAg Radio. Fantastic stuff. It is it's just so awesome to always hear from the audience and get your perspectives, your feedback, what you like, what you don't like, your opinion on things is truly fantastic. So I have really enjoyed myself, and we'll be broadcasting from here today and tomorrow as well for the Farmer Rapid Fire. So looking very forward to the next couple days of shows from here. Hey, today's show is brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. Don't put your yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Envil Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer high active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. There's imitators out there. Disregard. Think about Koch Agronomic Services because, like I said, brands can't match it. See the difference at defendyourn.ca. That's defendyourn.ca. Okay, as I mentioned, we are down at the Top Producer Summit. We're going to be joined today to talk markets with Jim McCormick. He is one of the co-founders of agmarket.net. He's going to talk about what can we expect from the markets. They've attempted to go to the upside here a little bit. Where do we go from here? What does he see for China demand? That's one of the concerning pieces that I've been hearing from market analysts here at Top Producer, is that China seemed a little soft. They seem a little soft from the demand standpoint. Not good timing, as the Trump administration is really trying to, honestly, twist China's arms, so to speak, and force them into some sort of, phase 1 2.0 deal. And they may not have the marketing or I guess the purchasing mojo to make it happen, or the need to do so. So I'm looking forward to talking to Jim about that. And of course, we'll talk about tariffs and trade and stuff like that as well. We'll be speaking of Koch Agronomic Services, we'll be joined by Bryce Geisel. He is going to be here to talk about some of the things that Koch has to offer. And then one of the coolest people that I have had a chance to meet here at Top Producer is Kimberly Ratcliffe. Now, she is a rancher from Texas, and she's got a great story. She was Woman of the Year here at Top Producer Summit 2025. It's such a unique story. She was working on Wall Street for Bloomberg, and now she is working. She went back to the family farm, family operation, and she has created this whole turnkey model for her and members of her community. Very cool story. I got a chance to sit with her during the USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins' address on Tuesday morning. So I got a chance to meet Kim, and it was I really enjoyed our interview and our discussion as well. And then we're going to be joined to wrap up today by Matt Clark. He's with Terrain, and we're going to talk about some farm equipment economics. What are some of the ratios and the numbers that you can put together so that you know whether or not that price you're paying for that piece of equipment is the right price. Very interesting. Yes, looking forward to hearing from Matt. Now, if you have any feedback on today's show, I would love to hear from you. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also, of course, call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Opening today was super cool. So, like I said, I'm at Top Producer. And the editor of the Scoop magazine and the person that puts this whole Top Producer Summit together is Margie Eckelkamp. And Margie hosted a panel. It was myself and also Kenneth Scott Zuckerberg, who is the Director of Global Research at CHS. And we talked about all the hot topics right now. Okay, so we talked about tariff, we talked about trade, we talked about South America, we talked about India, we talked about China, we talked about farm profitability, farm management. We talked about some specific Canadian issues relative to the U.S. It was fun. It was fun. I like to do keynotes, and I got a chance to do a concurrent session here, which really appreciate all the farmers showing up and enjoying it. Actually, Matt, he works for BMO in the U.S., and he came up to me and says, you know what, you said some things that will stick with me forever. I found them totally profound. And I was like, whoa. I'm making an impact there. I was like, what did I say, Matt, that got you kind of excited? And it stuck with you. He's like, I love the wrestling metaphors. I can't wait to tell Lindsay about that on Friday. I love a good wrestling metaphor. I do. I think they're underappreciated in today's world. Back to Ken Zuckerberg from CHS. It was really fascinating to kind of put all the puzzle pieces, or attempt to, as best we could, in terms of what the current U.S. administration is attempting to do and what some of the possible outcomes could be. And you've heard me talk about this on the show before. One of the challenges that is out there is trade diversification. There's only so many markets like the U.S. There's only so many markets we can send commodities to, like China. And a lot of people look at India. And Senator Roger Marshall was on the stage yesterday with Secretary Rollins. And one of the things that Senator Marshall said that it stuck with me is he said that he thinks that India could be a bigger ag market long-term than China. And I'm no market analyst, but I kind of have my doubts on that. And I'm applying a Canadian lens to that. Trade with India is difficult. It is very difficult. I think it's actually a little bit underappreciated in the United States how difficult India can be on the trade perspective. And listen, growers of special crops like chickpeas and lentils in Montana, in the PNW, they know this already because they've dealt with some of India's like forced fumigations, and they got tariffs on products coming in. So you're well versed in it, Montana, as an example. But the rest of the U.S., I think, is still coming is going to come to that realization. And that's one of the things I'm going to actually ask Jim McCormick about from agmarket.net here in a little bit. And the phrase that I used on the panel was, if you thought that trade was difficult with China, let me introduce you to their neighbor, India. And that one landed pretty good. I think people appreciated that way that I phrased that. So, yes, it's been a great time with Top Producer, and we've got more coverage of it when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Koch Agronomic Services.
Growing corn? With Envita, you can cut your nitrogen and maintain yield, or maintain nitrogen and increase yield. Envita takes nitrogen from the air and turns it into nitrogen for your corn. It provides a right place, right time source of nitrogen to maximize your yield. Farmers who use Envita see healthier plants, bigger cobs, and less tipback. Envita is guaranteed to add more bushels to every treated acre. Start growing with Envita. Visit azotic.com to learn more. That's AZOTIC.com.
It's time for our product spotlight. Joining me now, it's Chad Yanchiski, sales manager for FP Genetics. What's got you really jazzed up about varieties for this year?
One of our big varieties is AAC Synergies, a tried and true variety that people are well aware of. Great for malt, great malt acceptance. Kind of that number one malt acre right now, so a really nice yield package to it. And I think what you're going to see with it, it's going to continue to be that number one malt acre variety on the market for the next, 4 or 5 years. When I look into durum, we've got the first ever I-rated durum that hit the market. So it's an intermediate intermediate rating for Fusarium. And that one's super exciting because it's the first one that's ever been an I-rated durum in the world.
Where can farmers go for more information about these genetics? Agronomic support as well of how to make that choice on which one of these is the best fit for their farm.
So our website's probably the best spot, fpgenetics.ca. You can reach out to anybody at FP. We're all pretty well versed on our portfolio and varieties. And so sitting down, booking a meeting with us to really go over what your goals are for your farm will really help us pick that variety that's gonna suit your farm the best.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. Remember to go to defendyourn.ca. Well, lots happening in the market. It is attempted to provide kind of a version of a rally. It's working its way, edging its way higher. And as we get a little bit closer to the 2025 planting and seeding season, there's a lot of questions out there on what the crop mix is going to look like and how farmers can find some black, right? Instead of being in the red, how do we find some black? And this increase in the market prices has lifted the optimism a little bit, right? You can sense it in Canada and in the U.S. Want to catch up on all things market related with Jim McCormick of agmarket.net from Kansas City here at Top Producer. Here's our conversation.
What's the main thing people are asking you?
Well, the main question right now is, what's going to happen next? I mean, there's just a lot of uncertainty in the markets right now. We have a new administration, obviously, President Trump. A lot of the markets, people are asking what's going to happen next. We've had one heck of a rally in the corn market. I mean, from where the funds are carrying this massive short, Shaun, back in the fall, they reversed this to pretty hefty long, not at record length. That's pretty unprecedented reversal. So just a lot of uncertainty as to what do we do going into 2025-26 crop year. The big question now is how many acres we're going to plant. That's a common asked question.
So what's led to this reversal? Is there just a bunch of more demand in the market we didn't know about? Or is it a situation where we shot too far to the downside? What exactly happened here?
There's three different things I think that drove the market, the reversal by the funds. The first one was inflation. As you look, that market started to turn right about the time President Trump got elected. And the reason being, his policies that he's been pushing, tariffs, are inflationary. They just are. When you start tariffing products into the country, no one's going to bring that product in unless they can pass it on to their buyer. So it's inflationary. And then also you could argue with, maybe some of what he's doing with the immigration. You take people out of the workforce. And then you have to replace them. It's very hard to replace them. You got to pay the people to replace them more money. So an inflationary policy, it brought some fund money in and just said, you know what? We want to own commodities as a way to hedge inflation. And we started seeing that in the corn market. It was weird. You didn't see it in the wheat market, but you're starting to see it in the wheat market now. So some of it was inflationary. Some of it, the crop just was not as big as we thought it was, as the crop tailed off late in the year. And that also accelerated. And then lastly, because of the new Trump trade policies, export sales are way ahead of last year's pace. And that had people excited. Now, the exports are a little bit cautionary, I'd say, because we don't know is it front-loaded, or are they just actually, essentially, are they buying more than we originally thought? We really won't know that for another, I'd say, 4 or 5 months if these sales stay strong, or do they start tailing off? In essence, they just got everything they need, they just bought it early.
Yeah, we've seen that with some canola exports where the exporters are trying to get ahead of potential tariffs, right? And
exactly.
So that at the end of the year, the number may be the same, but the distribution of it through the months could be different.
Exactly. That's the wild card. Or did they come in and buy more than we originally thought?
Yep.
And the government made a big revision in the December WASDE report, and they raised demand up, and that was always the question. Did they, were they too aggressive raising demand? Now, if you look at that sales for the first quarter of the marketing year, yes. But like I said, were they just trying to front run it in front of a potential trade war? Time will tell.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've been hearing here this week, and you and I were chatting earlier, concern about the softness in China. And at a time where the administration is really trying to boost those ag exports, maybe make China live up to those phase 1 commitments, yep. Is the demand in China to do so?
I don't believe there is. I mean, the reality is this. China did a very poor job fighting COVID. They were in lockdown for multiple years. And as they did it, it decimated their middle class. Their middle class, China, interesting enough, they're a communist country, but they do not have social safety nets like Canada does, like the U.S. does. So when these Chinese were really hunkering down, they were spending a lot of their money. A lot of their assets also are in housing. Their housing market is absolutely collapsed. So you could argue if we're thinking we're going to get them to buy something, I fear we don't. I mean, right now the USDA is estimating, I believe, roughly 28 million metric tons less imports of corn, beans, and wheat this year than a year ago. And that just shows you how weak their economy is.
There's been a lot of talk about the corn acre being higher this year versus last year. Has that subsided a little bit, or are we still thinking like in that 6 to 8 million more acres of corn?
We are looking for a lot more corn acres, my belief. I think it's going to be very, very big. 2 years ago, we planted 94.6 million acres of corn. Okay? So if you just look at the normal rotation, if everyone stayed in rotation, you'd bring about 94.5 million acres of corn in just this upcoming year. But when you look at the profitability, like in Illinois, if you're an Illinois farmer, you need, I believe, $11 beans to break even. And if you're corn, you need like $3 or $4.64. So you're making money with corn, you're not making money with beans. My clients in Nebraska saying the same thing. It doesn't matter where you're at, to be quite honest. Yeah. There is no money in beans. So we are seeing a shift of acres that people do it. You go to the South, rice, cotton, they're moving away from those products. And the default right now, because of the current price of corn, because the fund's buying corn on that inflation demand, that is what we're buying. So it's a situation now, 95, 96 million acres isn't out of the realm of probability. Now it depends on what the yield is. If we plant 95, 96 million acres, we have anywhere close to trend line yields. Our carryout, which is around 1.5, balloons back over to 2 billion, and the whole paradigm shifts right back to bearish within 6 months.
So what's going on with soybean demand? Renewable fuels not doing their job? Like, what's happening?
Renewable fuels just haven't built out like a lot of people thought. I mean, there's a lot of excitement a couple of years ago. We've built some new ones, but not near as much. Part of it is the policy of used cooking oil was flooding the market. Used cooking oil is a much better carbon score. So that kind of hurt the demand for renewable or for bean oil. And then lastly, meal. Meal is just taking it on the chin. Why is that? Bird flu. Bird flu is ravaging, not just through the United States, but around the world. And that's hurting the demand for meal, which hurts the crush margins, which hurts the demand for beans. So just lack of demand.
So Jim, to wrap up here, in the short term, what are some of the key couple things that you're paying attention to and watching that'll provide us with some direction on where we go from here?
I think there's two things you really want to watch. First one is the fund direction. The funds, if they want to keep buying this product, corn, beans, wheat, whatever it is, they're going to drive it up. So you want to keep an eye on the funds week to week when we get these outlooks. See, are they adding or reducing? The second thing is you just got to see what the new Trump policies are going to be. We are in a lot of trade questions. There was a trade, we slapped tariffs in the U.S. on both Canada and Mexico. They paused them for 30 days. We got to see what happens when we come out of that pause. We got to see these reciprocal tariffs that the U.S. is doing. Then we got to see how other people reply. That is going to have a huge impact on where trade goes, I think. And, a lot's going to happen. A lot of these tariffs you got to keep an eye on. Are they tariffs? I mean, the question, Shaun, is, are the tariffs a negotiation tactic or are they a finance? Because President Trump goes back and forth. Sometimes he talks about his finance. So if he starts talking these tariffs as a way to finance his tax cuts, which is what he talks at times, it changes the game because it's no longer a negotiation tactic. Yeah. It is a monetary situation, which means once they're on, they're going to stay on.
Well, and what are you hearing as you talk to commercials out there or even farmers from the standpoint of who actually would pay the tariff? Because if you offer 25% less for Canadian spring wheat, you're not going to sell it, or you're not going to be able to buy it.
I mean, the reality is, I tell people the reality is this. It's the tariff is paid for by the people who want the product. The middleman, the guy that's bringing the product in, he's bringing wheat in from Canada, he's bringing a BMW in from Germany. If he has to pay a 20% tariff, 25% tariff to bring that product into the United States, he is not going to bring it in there unless he can pass it on to the consumer. Okay. That is just how it works. Why else would you do it? Why would you pay a tariff to lose money? So it will get passed on.
We've been talking to Jim McCormick from agmarket.net. Jim, you and your team you do great work. Thanks so much for taking some time for us here today.
I appreciate you having me on.
That was Jim McCormick of agmarket.net. Jim and his team do a fantastic job of analyzing all things market related. I think big question here is, are you updating the information that you have, right? So we've seen a bit of a marketing lift or a market price lift, and commodity prices were one of the big concerns here heading into the 2025 season. I think people are still concerned. because some prices are just not high enough to provide some sort of a profit. Now, there is things to still shake out here, especially in the corn and bean acre mix, as we were just chatting about. But make sure that you're updating, paying attention to that cash flow situation. Of course, cash is king in times like this, and updating that analysis so that your marketing plan here heading on old crop on 24, heading into 25, has the latest from a trend perspective and where things are, and you're maybe updating some of those price targets and things like that. So just a little bit of a reminder for everybody, and happy marketing and good luck to all of you, as this is no easy market to steer through indeed. Hey, when we come back on RealAg Radio, we got a product spotlight with Koch Agronomic Services, our sponsor here today from Top Producer Summit.
If you grow soy or edible beans in Ontario, you know that Sclerotinia white mold is no joke. Yield loss can be devastating, and timing fungicides can be complicated, but did you know there's a new seed treatment that can help mitigate yield loss? Start the year off with your best foot forward against disease. Ask your seed supplier or local Agrimart group to pre-treat your beans with Heads Up. Part of a complete white mold management plan, ask your seed dealer about Heads Up today or visit headsupst.com.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
Find everything you need for outstanding weed control in your wheat and barley from the cross-spectrum herbicide experts at Corteva. Corteva is proud to offer a wide selection of cross-spectrum herbicides for maximum convenience, effective resistance management, and customized control of your toughest grassy and broadleaf weeds. No matter what kind of weed challenges you're experiencing, we've got the right fit for your farm. Visit Corteva.ca to learn more.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. It's now time for a product spotlight with today's show sponsor, Koch Agronomic Services. We're joined by the senior agronomist with Koch Agronomic Services. It is Bryce Geisel. Hey, Bryce, how are we doing?
Doing well today. How about you, Shaun?
Hey, man, I'm doing pretty good. So, Bryce, why is it important for nitrogen to be readily available for plant uptake in the spring?
No, that's a great question, Shaun. So one of the interesting things about applying nitrogen in the spring is the crop doesn't really need all that nitrogen you applied right away. It needs it when the crop really starts to get established, gets those roots growing through the soil, and starts that rapid growth. That's when it's going to be taking up a lot of that nitrogen. So what that means is that nitrogen, as it's converting from that form that you applied it in on your farm to the plant available form, but that plant is not really growing up yet. It's not taking up a lot of nitrogen. It's really just sitting there. And while it's sitting there, it is at risk for losses and potentially, leaving your field and not being able to be utilized by the crop.
Now, Bryce, a lot of growers, they're concerned about where the profit margins are here on this 25 crop. I've been hearing it from farmers, Canada, the U.S. It's a big, major concern. So we're focused on ROI. So when we're thinking about nitrogen, how can we maximize the ROI of the nitrogen investment they're making on their farms?
A big return on that investment is to keep more of that nitrogen applied in the field being available for your crops. So unless you're putting that nitrogen 3 inches down where it will be well protected, nitrogen stabilizer might be a fit to help reduce those nitrogen losses that I mentioned before. So kind of that leaching, denitrification, volatilization losses. And that's going to keep more of that of where you need it. And the crops are going to be able to take it up when they get growing.
Okay, so if we think about the 4R, one of those is the right rate. When it comes to nitrogen stabilizers, why does the right rate matter? Like a lot of times when I think right rate, I think overall, just having the right rate of fertilizer, not necessarily the stabilizer. So talk about from the standpoint of the stabilizer.
Absolutely, yeah. We tend to think about those rates and trying to get that targeted, right down to where we want to get to hit those bushels that we're targeting. But it really does matter to the stabilizer as well, because what we're trying to do is protect that nitrogen, and we need a certain amount of stabilizer to do that. And it's really hard to predict how much nitrogen stabilizer is going to be needed, because this is going to depend on your fertilizer source, the rate of fertilizer you're putting down, your soil, your application method, and the weather that happens after application. So if the rate of that end stabilizer is too low, we can still end up with those losses to volatilization, leaching, or denitrification.
Yeah, and the more of that we're getting, that we're lowering our return again. So the questions kind of connect here in terms of what we're trying to manage. So how do products that Koch Agronomic Services measure? How do they measure up in terms of active ingredients? Talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. So our products have active ingredient levels and recommended rates to cover the broadest range of loss conditions to ensure the best protection of your nitrogen. This is tested in field trials across North America, including up here in Canada, both in the East and in the West. Our rates are also based on peer-reviewed third-party research at universities and other research organizations. So we're pretty confident that our products will protect your nitrogen investment.
So, Bryce, if we're thinking about other questions or considerations when it comes to nitrogen heading into 2025 planting and seeding time here, does anything else come to mind that we necessarily haven't covered?
I think one of the big things, too, is making sure that you're using the right kind of stabilizer for your application. There's going to be needs that you should be just utilizing a urease inhibitor like Anvil, other applications where you're using just a nitrification inhibitor, so like Centuro, and there's going to be other times where you're going to need both those types of inhibitors because you're trying to protect from all three forms of losses. So a product like Super U or Tribune are going to be great additions to be able to use those. So it's really going to be, dependent on how you're applying that nitrogen and when you're applying that nitrogen, but we want to make sure you're using the right product for the right application that you're doing.
Yeah, great point. Now, to figure all that out, how do people find out more about the lineup and the products that you have to offer at Koch Agronomic Services?
Absolutely. There's a lot to go through, but you can definitely go to our website, kochagronomicservices.ca, and you can get all that information and be able to reach out to a member of the Koch Agronomic Services team and ask some questions and find out what product's going to be the right fit to protect that nitrogen, protect that return on investment.
Hey, great stuff. Hey, Bryce, thanks a lot for joining us here today on RealAg Radio.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Shaun.
Hey, awesome stuff. And that is our, once again, today's show sponsor, Koch Agronomic Services. We'll be right back here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, right after this.
Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. And we're giving back. In the past 5 years, Co-op has invested over $1.1 billion in the prairies through building, upgrading, and expanding local facilities. And we've returned over $1.17 billion to Co-op members in the prairies. Co-op, we're all building something for the future. Here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Today's show is brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. Make sure you go to defendyourin.ca. And remember, there's some pretenders out there. There's some imposters out there when it comes to fertilizer products. You need to think about Koch. And that website is defendyourin.ca. Okay, now we're going to hear an interview that I did late Tuesday with Kimberly Ratcliffe. A very inspiring story. This is one of my highlights of the show, is getting a chance to meet her. She was recognized here at Top Producer as Woman of the Year at Top Producer Summit. A very fabulous story. Let's hear from her right now.
I'm doing great, thank you.
Well, we'll start off the top. Tell us about your farm.
So I'm located in East Texas, and I am a turnkey farm. I love to hear that, turnkey. So we have everything. So I produce cattle, all the way from the end user to the meat side of the business.
Wow.
So I actually buy from a lot of my producers in my community. I buy my commodities from my community. I process in my community. And I actually feed external community. So I said my community does the work and we feed the world.
That is a big endeavor.
It is. It is.
So what drove you to take on such a challenge?
Right. So my drive is probably a unique story. Right. I worked in a financial institution for a long time. And in that midst, I really realized the disconnect between the financial institution and my rural family that my father built. And that disconnect drove me back home. And when it drove me back home, I realized that people would come to me and say, well, I'm only a second generational rancher, my dad and then me. And many of them in the community are fifth, sixth generation, and they can't get their kids to come home. Right? So they kind of reached to me and said, as a young lady, how can you inspire my kids to come back home? And I always say we have to celebrate. Sometimes these dinner conversations are so intense, they don't want to come back home. But I think if we can use that celebration of how you guys have built this community, then we can get everyone to come back home. So I would celebrate us. Yeah. And that celebration ended up being a need of marketing. And that marketing ended up converting to a meat company. Right? It's all out of celebration. I didn't know why I was coming home first. I thought I was coming home to save my parents, of the stress of the daily day's work. But I realized I was saving the community.
That's a way bigger calling.
It is a big calling. But I will give my community 100% support. They are my biggest cheerleaders. They are the ones that really we love what you're doing. And I think if you can get a community behind your mission, then it's not as hard as you think it is. They're the first one to call me and say, what do you need done while you're gone? They're the first one to tell me, I will help you out. So I think if you can get them and they understand that you are really about them, it's really not that hard.
Yeah. As you tried to build this business and got it kind of rolling and set up, was there doubt that people had in the local community? What are you trying to do here? What were some of those experiences you had?
Right. I think for me, at first I was there to help. Right? I'm there to celebrate, and then I realized that there's a purpose. And I think that helping helped get the support, that she's not just here to try to make money off of us, right? She's here to genuinely help and bring a sense of caring in the community. So I really started with a nonprofit first. And that nonprofit was one that I got funding from a lot of universities, corporations, to really help some of the practices in my community. And those practices converted to meat. So they understand that wasn't my calling at first, but there is a profitability option in there for the community. But there's still a sustainable and all these practices option that we're still doing attached to the business. So having that whole full circle is pretty much why they're if I call them today, they'll be like, what do you need help with? If I'm available, they're going to help me, which is such an amazing thing. And I got to give them credit because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them.
So in this turnkey approach, what have been some of your biggest learnings?
I think for me at first, it's getting everyone, even though they're supporting me, getting everyone on board of the big picture, right? This is definitely community driven, but we can't keep cycling the money within our community. Then there's no profit margin. Telling them I'm thinking big, right? I'm thinking how we can get on the East Coast. How can I get in certain restaurants? How can I tell this community stories to other community to say, hey, this could be a success thing that can go in any community, right? This is a cycle that can be huge and change the economy for a lot of small towns. Grasping that we can be a model, right? It's really been a challenge a little bit.
So, Kimberly of today, working in agriculture in Texas,
right?
What would you tell the Kimberly that used to work on Wall Street?
When I worked on Wall Street, I didn't tell my parents what I wanted, right? I just literally came home and told them this is what I'm going to do. I think I probably would have had a little more conversation with my dad of the understanding on why I was coming home. But I was scared to have that conversation because the first thing I hear from parents is, why are you coming home to agriculture? Right? And I think that was a little bit of learning curve between my parents and I of understanding why I came home. And we worked it out, but I think not being fearful of telling people what your passion really is and why your passion is there. I think I could have had a lot of unnecessary hiccups. I remember when I first came home, I was probably fired 5 times, right? But those were the hiccups of like why I came home.
Yeah.
That I really have a dream, and then he encompassed that 100% once he realized I was serious. Right? I think the seriousness wasn't there. I remember we lived in an apartment that my parents bought in New York City, and he wouldn't sell it for 2 years, right? Because he was fearful that I was going to go back. But I knew I wasn't going back. So having that conversation before I came could have eliminated a lot of those uncertainties that I knew in my heart was what my goal was.
So where do you see yourself taking this operation in the future? What's the next stage of this dream that is really, it's become a reality and it's real? So
right.
what does the next look like?
I would love to make this a kind of, I don't think there's enough research on creating these type of systems, right? I know I can't feed the world, right? But I'm feeding who I can. And I think a lot of these systems could feed the world. So I really am trying to get people to research what we're trying to do. And how can we plop this in other areas and create these systems that can feed the world? Because we're going to have to change the way our food system is currently. So I would love to be that protocol, that model that can say, hey, this is really what agriculture is, because this is what it used to be, right? We used to have everything in one community. But now it's become corporatized, which I get it, and it's always going to be there. But there is a place for these models across the nation. So how can we create them?
How do producers participate with you? What does that look like?
So absolutely. A lot of producers are in my reaching area, right? Because I have to be able to see how I can reach you, bring your cattle. But a lot of times you can go to our website, which is RatcliffePremiumMeats.com. And I also have a personal website, KimberlyRatcliffe.com. And you could just go to contact us and say, hey, I have cattle, or hey, I want to see how about your nonprofit? How can I participate in that? Or hey, what else do you need value for, right? I think that's the start. It's just reaching me on those 2 platforms or social media. Of course, everyone has social media now. So you can follow us on social media and follow our journey, because I am kind of putting that journey on all the social platforms, because I think it's important. Again, another part is marketing my story so it can be journalized.
Yeah.
And social media now is a journal for everyone, right? And then you can see how we're creating this and develop and hopefully bring it to other areas across the nation.
And also here at Top Producer Summit,
yes.
You're one of the honorees, so talk about that.
I am. I'm so honored to be the Women Ag Award tonight, and it's just an honor. And I've been around other women that had this award, and just to be on that same platform of some of these great women, and just to be recognized in an industry that sometimes we are not recognized. And it's just an honor that Farm Journal sees the need of recognizing the awesome women that what we're doing in ag today.
Well, Kimberly, it's been great to meet you. I had a chance to sit with you during Secretary Rollins' fireside chat this morning. It's been an awesome experience. Hopefully we get a chance to talk again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That was Kimberly Ratcliffe, Woman of the Year here at Top Producer Summit. Very inspiring story, moving from Wall Street to the farm, to the ranch, and then doing this turnkey operation. Very cool, and obviously a big proponent of community involvement as well. So congratulations to Kimberly on her recognition here at Top Producer, and all the best to her going forward with her operation. Okay, today's show is brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. Make sure you go to defendyourn.ca. When we come back, we're going to talk about farm machinery economics with Matt from Terrain right after this. Lima Grain Cereal Seed brings you best-in-class performance for winter and spring wheat, including 12 national wheat yield contest winners in 2024. With the most extensive coaxium portfolio and over 15 top-performing varieties, Lima Grain delivers superior genetics to control grassy weeds when you need it, fall or spring. Boost your yield potential today. Visit limagraincerealseeds.com or call your LCS Regional Commercial Manager for more info.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147. Today's show is brought to you by Koch Agronomic Services. We're now going to talk about farm machinery economics, and not from the aspect of, how are machinery sales going? Are they up? Are they down? What's the used market doing? What's the new market doing? But from your purchasing decision standpoint, and I'll be honest, I think about farm machinery from the standpoint of what is the price, but not from a ratio perspective. So this is very cool. We're going to talk to Matt Clark. He is with Terrain. Here's our conversation. So you just finished your concurrent session. We just got out into the hallway. You were talking about farm machinery economics. Okay, what was the angle there?
So the angle is actually a conversation from last top producer. I was talking with a group of customers, and we were just chatting through how do we think about long-term trends of farm equipment. How do we know when's a good buy? How do we know when we're out of bounds in terms of our financial seats? We've all got ratios of, your current asset to current liability ratios. We got debt to asset ratios. How do we break it down and think about some very specific things that top producers are doing and put that in context long term? So that was the big picture.
It's sort of like almost like a Moneyball approach to buying farm machinery, which I've never thought about before.
Yeah, and obviously this is the topic, right? I mean, farm machinery is one of those things that we're all thinking through individually. So it was a bit of a Moneyball approach. The one thing after looking at it for a year, there's obviously outliers. There's no easy answers, but there were some kind of key takeaways.
Okay.
So a few that I found that were pretty clear is if you look at your current assets and you compare that to your equipment, if your equipment assets were higher than your current assets on hand, you tended to be more in the lower end or lower profitability brackets. If you had that ratio much lower, by and large, you were almost always in the top income brackets. That doesn't mean that those that had a ratio that was lower were cheap by any means. They certainly had a lot of equipment, just that they had managed that balance sheet a little bit more carefully.
You had told me one of the kind of calculations that somebody had used was, what was it, 1,500 acres of wheat?
Yeah, my first approach was to think about asking some people who were very successful, well, how have you thought about new equipment purchases in the past? And not including trade-ins, just straight up the price of a new one. And a very well-to-do older farmer gave me how many acres of gross revenue of wheat they're willing to give up to buy a tractor. It's a historical relationship. So I compared that a little bit more back to corn, just because it's a little bit easier to think about. And what I found is, historically, if you go back from 1990 to now, the cost of a new 200 horsepower tractor costs you roughly 300 acres of gross revenue of corn. If you want to bump up to a 300 horsepower above, it's a little bit above 400 acres of gross revenue. So again, if you look at that historically and look at the periods where we were below that, typically those are periods when most farmers say, oh yeah, that's when I bought. That was a good time to buy.
That would be interesting to walk into your local equipment dealer and say, listen, you know what, I think the tractor is a little bit too much. I'm only willing to pay 400 acres worth of corn.
Hey, it's an idea, or more than anything, it's just how do you have a checklist in your mind?
Yeah.
You go to the bank, you know your financial ratios at the bank. How then do you also have that next level of checklist? Like, hey, here's some other things that I want to think about strategically before I buy, before I expand.
So what were some of the questions that farmers asked you in the session?
Yeah, a lot of great questions. Mainly, how can I get the slides? That was a good one. So that means I'm either onto something or I'm off. But a lot of just questions about, if I'm a diversified operator, is that going to look different? And yeah, if you've got livestock and you do fall crops and you do some sort of wheat crop, or you got hay, your costs are just going to be higher. That's just part of it, right? And so you got to think about that in context. There are questions about that. There are questions about how do I balance my balance sheet correctly, with the idea of, hey, I don't want to be so top heavy where if my expenses really run up quickly and I've got these big payments, what's that mean? And that can turn quick. Whereas if I've got a balance sheet that's more appropriately put together, or I've got a lot more wiggle room because of some of my longer and medium term assets are correct to my income, Those are a lot of the questions. And so,
do you find in this part of the cycle that ag's going through, which in the corn and soybean belt is one of tight margins? We're coming off a situation where equipment was very high priced, used and new, and we've seen machinery sales drop. And so is there a heightened amount of people applying, doing these kinds of analysis currently, or because they can?
If I could say it slightly differently, there's deals there. Now, there's deals, right? And it doesn't matter if that's used or if it's new, there's going to be some deals. And so I think what you see is a period of the people that know their numbers and that they're crunching these numbers, they know what their 3-year cash flow looks like or what they think it looks like. They're going to be buyers and they're going to get some great long-term deals. If you're reactionary to everything, yes, there's probably heightened demand for some of these things, but it's maybe more out of stress than it is out of looking for deals, and that's tough.
Do you have any insight or looking forward on where machinery prices go from here?
No, I wish I did.
That's not your game?
I tried really hard to make some historical correlations, and there are some to net receipts. There's some to your cost of production metrics. There's some. But truthfully, it does vary, and and where you are and what you're doing, it really does vary a little bit. So it was a little bit too much to try to spin that out for 3 to 4 years with confidence.
It's sort of like machinery purchases, which farmers are expecting to cut back as well in 25, just like they did in 24. It's sort of like fertilizer, where it's like I know I need it, but I want it to be cheaper. Sure. And you say what should the price be of that combine or that 4-wheel drive or 200 horsepower tractor? I don't know, just less than it is today.
Yeah, so it's right. But just to expand the analogy, that's why we have agronomists, right? That come out and give us an idea of hey, this is what you need.
Yeah.
And it's why you have hopefully farm managers that are watching those prices and trying to get you positioned right. You're working with your accountant to kind of prepay some of it to make it a little bit cheaper on the tax side or to lessen that actual cost.
Yeah.
I would say let's flip it and do the same thing with equipment, right? Let's just think about it very strategically.
How does the increase in the amount of technology, maybe it's whether it's autonomy or robotics or artificial intelligence, sensors, all the different cool stuff that tractors and pieces of machinery can do today, does that change any of the ratios at all?
A little bit. So I snicker here because I've got this Ford 4000 back home.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, there was a period when that was a row crop tractor, right? And you probably could have plowed all day and thrown a rock over what you plowed, right?
Yeah.
And you compare that today, and it's almost comical. Because, we're kind of laughing because it's almost comical, the difference, right? That's why I brought everything back in my work to ratios. Because in theory, if and it's true, they're much more efficient. But if you're scaling correctly, those ratios to your cost and to your income should be the same over a long-gated period of time.
Yeah.
So there'll be periods where they bounce around, but you should be able to find that trend.
Well, Matt, really appreciate you joining me here today. Keep up the great work at Terrain, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Shaun.
That was Matt Clark with Terrain, talking about farm machinery economics. I would be very curious to know, are you applying that kind of math that Matt is talking about? There was a lot of people in his concurrent session, and I know some of you that are looking at analysis and really digging into the costing of equipment from an operating standpoint and really doing a lot of logging and really that fine-tuning and really knowing your numbers and, things like fuel consumption and just really digging into the details. But I'm curious how many of you on the, is this a good price? Because I think the majority of the farming population is looking at the value of a piece of equipment relative to historical prices on a gross basis or to other things that are on the market. And there's a lot of pricing transparency out there right now with all the online auctions. I think if you go back a generation, there was a lot of opportunity to, find that deal based on the fact that it was like a little unknown auction in some little rural town, and maybe there was a bit of some bad weather and everybody didn't show up for the auction. And now you think about some of the auction online platforms that are out there, I think that really became a lot more difficult. And at the same time, though, I and maybe you, the audience, will tell me differently. Maybe you'll tell me differently, but I kind of think that a lot of people aren't necessarily looking at, and we compared to Moneyball, but looking at some of these values based on some, new generation statistics and analysis. Very cool stuff. That 1,500 acres of wheat, that is, I'd never heard that before. Maybe some of you have, but I've never heard that before. Very interesting stuff indeed. At the beginning of the show, we were talking about the markets. We are seeing here, I think, a lift in, and when I say lift, I think it's in the perspective on what kind of year 2025 has been. But I'll say this. I've seen firsthand, and in my presentations that I've been doing across Canada and the U.S., I often compare the Purdue CME Ag Barometer numbers to what we're seeing in our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, because I find that interesting. And the numbers don't lie, okay? I can tell you my feel of things, but the numbers don't lie. And what the numbers are telling us is if you look at future expectations, the American farmer is pretty much doubly as optimistic about the future as the Canadian farmer. Now, is that based on profitability? No. That's based on the politics of things. That's based on the government that is in place. And you can see the Ag Barometer in the U.S. really take off post-U.S. election. So there's this belief in farm country that President Trump is going to lead American agriculture to the promised land, so to speak. Secretary Rollins said on the stage on Tuesday, it's going to be they want to push to being not only the golden age for America, but the golden age for American agriculture. And it's no secret, Canadian farmers don't necessarily, they don't politically align with the current Liberal government in Canada. In fact, if our last time we surveyed about this, it was in October, only 0.4% of Canadian farmers believe that the Liberal government is doing the best they can to support Canadian agriculture. That's a pretty low approval rating. We are going to see a flip and a change when there is a Conservative government, assuming that the Conservatives do win the next election. I'm interested to see how much that closes that gap. So if we do get a Conservative government in Canada, do we see the farmers' future expectations get more in line with their U.S. neighbors? Or is there still going to be a bit of a lag there? It's going to improve. That gap is going to close. But the question is, how much and how much will be left on that? Same markets, same prices for the most part. There's regional differences, of course, but there's a lot of similarities. Like the gap should not be double. Let's put it to you that way. But it is double. And there's, the farmers like what they heard from Secretary Rollins here yesterday. I'll say that. One of the main questions I get from the Canadian audience is, how do farmers feel about some of the tariffs? I said this on RFD TV this morning that, I kind of did some informal polling in my concurrent yesterday. Farmers believe that the tariffs on Canada and Mexico are a negotiating tactic. I don't think they actually believe that they're going to go into place. So, but what I also heard yesterday from a friend of mine, very much in the trade know, he said, don't assume that Trump 2.0 is the same as Trump 1.0 when it comes to trade policy. That's a bit of a warning shot because a lot of people are applying, the art of the deal, and they're applying, here's what happened in the first administration, push people into a negotiating of this USMCA agreement. Now they want to, basically trying to push Canada and Mexico into a revamping and a renegotiation of that deal. If only it was that easy. I think Canada and Mexico would gladly say, okay, let's talk. Let's talk. Fascinating times, for sure, from a Canada-U.S. relations standpoint. Hey, really want to say thank you to Koch Agronomic Services for being the show sponsor here today. Make sure you go to defendyourn.ca. Great nitrogen stabilizers. They do just some fantastic products to lead you to a higher yield here in 2025 across many different crop types. So defendyourn.ca. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thank you so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. We'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast episode, brought to you by Authority Strike herbicide from FMC. Tackle tough weeds like kochia, cleavers, Russian thistle, and pigweed with the dual power of 2 Group 14 modes of action. Visit your local retailer today or visit ag.fmc.com/ca to find out more.